Hi again, class. Michael McCarthy with the Harvard Blockchain course, and I'd like to welcome Jeff Tumpowsky, who is a FinTech advisor and a blockchain consultant. Jeff, welcome.
Hey, thank you, Michael. Yeah, great to be back.
So today we're going to be talking about digital assets and digital rights management. So Jeff, let's just jump right into it. What does blockchain have to do with digital assets and digital rights management, and what are they?
Right. So, I mean, first of all, as you know, once you start going deep on any of the areas within blockchain, it's a broad topic. It's not just, hey, we have one use case and that's it. But when you look at digital rights management, it has a broad capability. You could be talking about things like music or something like a video, or you could also be talking about an identity on a person. And that's what I'm going to go a little deeper on, because I feel like there's digital rights from a personal identity perspective. And think of it similarly when you think of non-living things. But there's a lot of really interesting things you could do. Think about how many IDs you manage for your online presence. So you as a person, I mean, how many different IDs do you use across the different logins you have personally? Okay, and by the way, everybody says a new password, and for everything you're supposed to have a new password, potentially new ID for each one of them. How do you manage that effectively? So there's a lot of vision out there on how identity will be managed effectively on using a blockchain capability. I mean, we're talking, clearly from a consumer perspective, how do you make it a little bit more convenient to be both protecting your data, but also having access to these sites in a more effective way? I can remember, my father maintains a hard copy piece of paper that, it's clearly created on a spreadsheet, but it's like 3 or 4 pages deep of all his identities, all his crazy, I mean, he's gone to extremes. It's like uppercase, lowercase, a couple of special characters. It gets tedious. And by the way, sometimes he doesn't update the stuff that you're supposed to do on the sheet, even though he's updated it, and then you end up with things that are not accurate. So this is a way that you as an individual can manage your digital data. You can actually figure out what you want to share from a digital data perspective. So, you don't have to share everything. You could just share, hey, I'm going to say, as if you want to share your credit card information. What is it that is needed to create that, make that transaction quicker? So it's really about creating, something a little bit more convenient for the consumer. For businesses, they're on the other side, businesses are also dealing with issues with identity, right? So there's fraud out there, and there's a percentage of their business that they put up to fraud. So if they can get more certainty, as they know who they're dealing with from a digital perspective, they know you have a history, and therefore they can, maybe give you more credit, be more comfortable with a transaction, maybe be quicker with sending things out because they know the transaction's going to close, right? So, typically right now we're still waiting. The credit card companies actually have a lot of the risk for even though, all businesses will say, I feel really bad paying that 2 or 3% or maybe 4% to a credit card company. They're guaranteeing the payment. So for a business, it's a good thing. I'm going to get paid no matter what. For the consumer, also a good thing, because they know that there's a person in the middle, that if there's a fraudulent issue, there's going to be a company that deals with that. But with this identity management, you now could manage your identity really from, they're doing a lot of token authentication and authentication using 2 different methods. So I don't know if you were experiencing this or others, but a lot of times now, when you log on to company websites, when I'm remote from my company, I actually have to have not only an ID, I log in on the mobile device. It also has almost like a random key generator on another device. So if I'm it has another app on your device, so you're essentially getting two factor authentication, and that's another way of helping us move towards this identity management, where you can start to share different things. It's also a way for us to start to manage, create more of a standardized process. So if we start to think about a standardized process using blockchain for identity management, it's going to be starting to be more of a standard process. Because today, if you go from website to website, not every website is created equal. Some you just log on. Some they say, oh, you can use your email address. Some you can use 4 characters to get on. Some uses 6. Some uses 8. A more standardized process would be a good thing from a business perspective. Again, making it more simple and easy, but also from a regulated perspective, so they know, hey, are we dealing? Are we managing privacy? Are we managing the data properly? The other really interesting thing about data management on a blockchain or identity management is that the data actually, your personal data, is never actually at the company that you do business with. Okay, this is a key part of it, and what makes it really interesting is that usually it's a crypto key that is shared, and that crypto key is authenticated on the blockchain. And once it's authenticated, you are now, they believe who you are, and then you can start doing business. But they don't, like in today's world, you're sharing your data with every company out there that you're doing business with, and if, by the way, if they get hacked, your data's there. Okay, in this case, the data never gets there. The only thing that's there on the other side is the fact that they have verified your identity.
So, for example, just to bring it to something concrete, let's say that I'm bidding on a classic car at Sotheby's, and I want to be an anonymous bidder. I don't want them to know my name, where I live, how much money I have, social security number, all that. Because they might know, oh, Michael buys a bunch of cars, raise the price, or maybe I'm just really private. But with blockchain, it could just say, he's a qualified bidder. You don't know who or what he is, male, female, but they can bid on this car. They've got the money for it.
Absolutely. So that's exactly how it would be done. There would be some authentication. You would be able to share the fact that you are a qualified bidder. All right. So they would qualify you as that qualified bidder. Boom, you are. And then, like you said, all that other data is not, you don't need to share that. I don't know how many times when I get into a situation where a company asks me for my social security number. Yeah. And I'm like, well, why do you need that? I'm really reluctant to give that to them because I just know that there's no reason to have it out there, is what I'm saying. And in fact, my kids probably, I know my social security number by heart for years. My kids don't know theirs, and I've kind of made it that way where they're not out there sharing that data on any regular basis, because this is just not. We're not at a point where I feel it's a very safe environment to share data. And I always say, I also don't. Again, you're going to get me as a, maybe I'm a. I feel like that. Everything. I don't know. I've got my Faraday room around me so that no data is like, I'm very paranoid, but needless to say is I'm not that way. I'm cautious. Okay, cautious is really probably the proper word, and I think you need to be cautious. There are things that are going on out there. You need to make sure you understand what you're giving your data to, and this is a way to help you and help the everyday person that doesn't know all the details on how to manage their data.
Well, when you talk about the identity of, I can just give you enough to verify that I'm a qualified person for whatever I'm doing, but you don't have all this. Could you actually use blockchain to create new social security numbers, like retire the old system, since so many people's social security numbers have already been hacked? Could you use blockchain to create a new type of social security that wouldn't be hackable?
Right. So, Social Security is literally just our way of of kind of verifying data, right? So think about all the different things that go in place before you get your Social Security number. You have to produce your birth certificate. All that stuff is verified behind the scenes before a Social Security number is issued. But that's the issuing authority, if you think about it. That's a third-party authority kind of saying you are who you are if you use this number. But clearly it's not a safe method. So as you just said, if we create more of a digital Social Security number or digital identity that we can share in a more effective way, and there's a couple of companies out there. A company called Civic.com is very interesting, the way that they're offering up this capability for sharing an identity. You can have companies can offer, bring their technology into a business transaction. They actually have it open for government use for different types of identity. I think you and I have talked about, again, verification of who you are, what your assets are, what your credentials are. You could have your degrees part of your identity. We've talked a little bit about movement of folks that have different medical degrees from outside the U.S. today. Sometimes they're not given verification if they can't prove it easily. These are ways that we can cross borders, have a way that you can verify who you are, and your credentials go with you.
And we had talked about this previously before we started recording, that you could use this identity for refugees.
Yes. So that's really an interesting way. I've talked about just the everyday person in the U.S. A more of a modern situation where you have access to your mobile device or your digital online experience. A situation with a refugee, whether you're fleeing from your house. I even think about the situations in the U.S. where wildfires just rip through your house. By the way, all your documents are gone.
Yeah.
So what happens if maybe your digital identity is kind of gone? You might have had it all written down on a couple of pieces of paper. By the way, that's all shredded and smoked up. So I would say that you have an opportunity to really use other biometric data as well. So there's things like that. Again, think about your whether it's fingerprints or retina scans or looking at what's going on with the new Apple iPhone 10. You got facial recognition capabilities. These are parts of your identity that can be put into your identity for verification. And think about if you had folks in, I'm sure there are situations where if you took folks that are in these refugee camps, there's going to be doctors or folks that have, could they help process other people or help other people within that refugee camp? Right now that's probably not being done. They're just being ushered through a process. But there are folks that have skills that could have really, both help themselves as well as help others within that process.
Well, I have two examples for you. One is we have a lot of Syrian students at Harvard, and some of their parents are in camps. And
unbelievable, yeah.
They have PhDs and they're doctors, but when they go to the border guards or whoever's the administrator of the camp, they say, "Hi, I'm a doctor." You're just
how do you verify that?
You'll borrow T-shirts from the Salvation Army, and we don't know that if you're making it up or not, and they're still there. We had a specific example here with the hurricane in Puerto Rico. Some teachers from Puerto Rico came to Florida, and now they're teachers' aides. Although they had been teachers for 20 years in Puerto Rico, they don't have their teacher certificates. So they have to start over in Florida, but if they had that digital identity, they could just pick up again, and they wouldn't have that lost income.
Absolutely. There's, again, then we have to start thinking about how our local governments, create more havoc from going from one state to another. Because I have heard that sometimes your teaching certificates don't travel with you, meaning that you might have situations where you have, like you said, you might have taught in one location. Typically, they'll give you an opportunity to teach in most other states, but there are situations where you have to kind of prove yourself from a local perspective. I mean, law is one of them, right? So passing the bar in one state doesn't mean you're able to pass the bar or you have rights to practice in other states. That type of thing could happen a lot more easy. Can you create a little bit more movement and accessibility for people that have those skill sets? And like you said, sometimes I think it's, I call it barriers to entry. Lawyers are making up reasons why they're special sometimes, but I mean, they all do that. But I mean, that's kind of what they don't want everybody jumping in and being a lawyer. But I think the identity part is really an interesting place to be, and the blockchain really enables it. It's a combination of the cryptography and the distributed nature that allows it not to be, there's not a central location with all your identity sitting, and not any of those transactions have it either. And it's really nice that you are able to do business, you can prove who you are, and again, could be a business transaction, could be, hey, let me get through this. There's a need for you to help because of your credentials with a refugee situation.
Now, on the ID, you've mentioned three types of ways to identify someone, and I'm thinking, let's say I'm in a refugee camp, like maybe I was in California in the wildfire, and now I'm in some processing center trying to tell them, hey, I'm a teacher. I have I have a checking account. I can fly out of here if you just let me have access to my credit card. So I see three ways of identifying myself. One is facial recognition. The second is fingerprints. The third is a retina scan, all which could be done even if I'm just standing here in borrowed t-shirt and flip-flops. Are there any other ways of identifying me if I'm in a refugee camp?
Clearly there, I would say that the last one, obviously you can always get down to different types of, if you took a blood sample, there's other types of DNA testing and stuff that can be done to really prove out. I would say that's more of an extreme situation. I don't think folks are looking at that right now. Clearly that helps. That could be part of your identity. It's really trying to connect the data that's in this kind of digital identity to ways that don't require you necessarily to also have everything. There would likely be a password in addition to a physical physical something that you have on you.
Is there anyone that's using this now that has started a company already doing this? You had mentioned last week, I think, ID 2020.
Yeah, so ID 2020 is a really interesting opportunity. So they are combining what I described earlier as that digital identity capability. So almost think of it as an identity platform that can be used for things like personal identity, or even it has very much applicability for that digital rights management area. All right, so there's an identity platform, and then there's this biometric capability that adds on to it. They're doing work actually at a very much like the United Nations level to really try and bring this up a level so that things like migrants and issues that we work with on a humanity basis, whether it's famine or other reasons why people start to move across borders, can be done more effectively. And I would say, not to get political, but I think it could actually help with our immigration within the U.S., because you start to understand who someone is, and you would have a lot more data on someone as they come to a border. You would know if I could let this person in, as opposed to I'm judging you by your cover. I think you look like something that is potentially harmful to me, and that's really what I think is done today. A little bit more of whether it's racial profiling or what. I have a cousin who looks Mid-Eastern. He's got a dark complexion, and he says he gets stopped all the time, and he's never been anywhere but the U.S. So it's that type of issue that you get from the way we do our I guess deeper dive on who you are, on borders and customs and stuff like that. This would help things dramatically.
Okay. And what are some other things that we should know about with digital identity and digital assets?
So I would say, and I know that you have some other folks talking about this. We're still at the early days of what's going on here. So there's no standard yet. I would say I like to think there's at least a couple of different ways that people are going, but I think the underlying blockchain standards are still not in place. So you're going to find that, different blockchain capabilities, every one of these use cases and every one of these companies might be using blockchains that can be used. Think of blockchain as that use case of the technology that can be put in place. And it's not necessarily like it has to be a Betamax or VHS, discussion. I'm seeing blockchain where you might have a public blockchain and a private blockchain working together. You can actually connect those together. So I think there's opportunity as these use cases become real for more folks to just say, hey, I like that use case. I could potentially bring that in. That's what I think something like Civic is doing, where you can integrate their capability into your current business process. I think there's, again, I mentioned Identity 2020. I mean, Microsoft's involved with that. Accenture's involved with that. IBM has a number of really interesting identity solutions out there from a blockchain perspective. And I think there's some really cool things. I mean, there's a lot of, as the folks in your classes are the ones that are yearning for information, but I mean, the best, every time I go and do a new search, there's more new data on the subject. So there's constantly things going on.
Okay, so let me ask my final question, which is one of my standard ones for our students. Let's say that we have a student that's really interested in this digital asset space, identity, and they wanted to go into that career using blockchain. What direction would you point them in? Where should they go? Imagine that they could move anywhere. They're completely mobile. Where would you point them?
So I would say that I look at a couple of, so you have the companies that are really putting together specific use cases. I would call them, they're really the companies like Civic. And sometimes they're raising money through a typical venture capital way, or there could be an initial coin offering. Those are ways that these companies are getting funded. I would say that there's also a lot of large companies that are getting involved with this type of innovation, and they see it as ways that they can help their customers using technology in a different way. I mentioned IBM, Cisco is another one. I mentioned Microsoft. All of these companies are doing work in this space. So if you're interested, they're probably hiring for roles. The other spot that might be very interesting from a role perspective is also companies that are doing that are actually building the underlying blockchain technologies. And then the last one, which is actually a really interesting, I just happened to get a feed on it, was like companies like Bank of America. They've actually filed like 20 patents in the blockchain space in the last 2.5 years. And so what you're seeing is, again, very related originally to finance, but some of the things are identity related. And you're going to start to see more and more of those. The really interesting thing is no one's doing this alone in a bubble. So when you see use cases coming together, a lot of times you see a company like Civic working with, whether it was Microsoft or IBM or maybe even another third party, a part of a chain of companies that would be getting involved. People are not going it alone, and that's actually making the use cases even more real. And I think making the pilots, they're learning a lot from them. I would call a lot of these substantiations at this point a pilot. So they're trying things out, they're learning from them, and then they're making them better. Interesting.
Jeff, thank you so much for your information and your insights. And we really appreciate all the time that you spend with us. And we look forward to our next interview with you.
All right. Hey, thanks a lot, Michael.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.